Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Yud Zayin, and with that we will finish the first chapter of Bava Batra. Today's daf is sponsored by Batsheva and Daniel Pava in loving memory of her father, Reb Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Zichrono Livracha, on his first yahrzeit. My father was a child survivor of Auschwitz, became a Talmud of Reb Michal Bar Weissmandel. My dad was a hero. I miss him every single day. Okay, we're going to get started now with Tanu Rabbanan at the bottom of Tet Zayin Amud Bet. So we're going to finish up these stories. We're done already with Eov. Let's just remind ourselves how we got here. We were talking about, the whole chapter was really about dividing of joint property or joint courtyards. Then we got to, but you can't divide Kitvei Kodesh because they have a different level of sanctity. And from that, we got into Kitvei Kodesh and we got into scrolls and how they're written, what the rules are, and then we got into who wrote different books of Tanakh, and from there we got into that Moshe wrote Eov, and then we said, well, when did Eov live? And we had all these discussions, and we ended up with this long digression about Eov. It actually reminded me of, remember the chapters in Masechet Megillah, you might remember there's a whole chunk of Dapim, actually much longer than these, about all these drashot on Megillat Esther, and it's kind of interesting because it was kind of like that, where we just take pasuk after pasuk in Eov and darshan them. Okay, where it's kind of atypical for the Gemara to be doing that. The real question is, why is this here? Why do we have a whole digression about Eov, specifically in the first chapter of Bava Batra? I'm going to leave it to you to think about over Shabbat. I haven't come up with an answer yet. I'm not sure if I will, but I'm going to try to think about it and think about what the connection of Eov. And, I thought about a little bit of his friends, because a lot of this is all about your neighbors and your relationships with others. But there wasn't so much of a focus on that, although there was a bit of it in these psukim, in these drashot. Anyway, it's something to think about why Eov, specifically if you're going to want to talk about why did it end up here. Obviously, you can always say, well, technically we were talking about Kitvei Kodesh, but usually I think there's more of a reason as to why that is. Now, because we got into Eov and we were talking about that. Sorry, about the daughters and the daughters of Eov, and why at the end of the book does he not get double the reward about the daughters? So just like Eov, we said about his daughters, and that maybe there's this machloket about whether it's good to have daughters, not good to have daughters. When from there we got into Avraham and how there's the same debate by Avraham, and now we're going to basically finish the chapter off with some things that were unique about Avraham, specifically based on this pasuk of Hashem berachad Avraham bakol, that we had 7 different interpretations of what this is. 3 of them related to having a girl and whether it's a blessing or not a blessing. From there, we're going to get into all sorts of other drashot, not only about Avraham, but we're going to see that his sons, Yitzchak and Yaakov, were also blessed with a very similar type of blessing. And what does this mean about the 3 of them? And we're going to have a whole bunch of different opinions about what that blessing includes. So, Tanu Rabbanan, very bottom of yesterday's daf. Shlosha itiman HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olam hazeh, me'ein olam haba. By the way, it's okay. Let's just read it, and then I'll tell you the by the way. There are 3 people in this world who God gave them a taste of what the world to come is going to be like, meaning they had a very good life. God blessed them with many great things. Who were these people? Elohen, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Notice who's missing here? Eov. We already said it just before that Eov also ended up with Me'en Olam Haba, but this drasha doesn't seem to allude to that at all. And why the 3 of them? Avraham dichtiv be bakol. That's we saw Hashem berachad Avraham bakol. Yitzchak dichtiv be mikol. Okay, this is in the pasuk we saw the other day about Yecharad Yitzchak Charadat Dolah, when he realizes that Yaakov has taken Esau's bracha, and then it says, Mi efohu atzad sayid vayaveli va'ochal mikol. I will eat from everything, meaning he also got everything. And Yaakov dichtiv be kol. By Yaakov it says kol, which is kachnet birchati. When Yaakov goes to Esau, he says, "Take my blessing, asher aveti lach, ki chanani Elohim v'chiyesh li kol." God has been good to me, and I have everything. This is right what you always want. Right? We always say you can't have everything. They had everything. You might recognize already that when we say in the benching, Otanu v'yakol asher lanu, right? We want to be blessed like Kemoshne Perchu Avotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Bakol, Mikol, Kol. That's this. Okay, that's exactly from these 3 words and from this Gemara that puts those 3 words together. other things about these brachot. We're now going to have different versions of what does it mean bakol mikol kol. We have right now, they lived me'en olam haba in this world. Shlosha lo shalat behem yetzer hara. The evil inclination didn't control them. Eluhen, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, dechtibu bakol mikol kol. Okay, so again, it's a different bracha from bakol mikol kol. They had everything, meaning the evil inclination didn't rule over them. V'yesh omrim af David. Some people add David to this list, which is interesting because he's sin with Bathsheba. What was that if not Yetzer Hara? Okay, some people say that this is according to the opinion. Remember, there's Gemara that says anyone who says David sinned eno ela to'eh is mistaken. He really didn't sin with Bathsheba, and then they have to explain it some other way. Anyway, perhaps this goes like that. Dichtiv libi halal b'kirbi, which is almost like my heart was destroyed within me, which means my evil inclination. Idach, now the ones who say that David did sin had it, or they don't have David on the list of, they just have, remember, we had Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Some people say David. So how do they explain that pasuk? When he said my heart sunk inside me, meant I was very sad from all the tragedies that I went through in my lifetime. I went through a lot, and that means something totally different. Tanu Rabbanan, another bright about these topics. Shishalo shalat behem malach hamavet. There's 6 people who malach hamavet didn't get to. Okay, we've been talking about malach hamavet and the Satan. So there's 3 people, 6 people, the angel of death never got to, which means they died directly from God. The angel of death isn't the one who brought their death. Elohen, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, for the obvious reasons of that's what it means they had everything. Moshe, Aharon, Miriam. I'll have to explain why then. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, dichtibu bakol mikol kol, as you can expect. Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam, dichtibu al pi Hashem. Okay, by Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, although not exactly, but it says by them they died al pi Hashem. It says it explicitly in the pasuk. So let's see. From Aharon, it says Vayal Aharon HaKohen at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. El Hor Hahal al pi Hashem vayamat sham. Okay, so he goes up to the Har Hashem by God's word and dies there. Moshe, turn the psukim we just read, Vayamat sham Moshe eved Hashem be'eretz Moav al pi Hashem. Okay, Moshe died there by the word of God. Okay, what they understand by the word of God is to be like with the kiss of God, that God basically kissed them, and with that they died. V'ha Miriam lo k'tiv al pi Hashem, but how did she get to this list? It doesn't say al pi Hashem when it says she died. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Miriam nami b'nishika meta. She also died with the kiss of God. Da'atya, right? The way they understand, I explain al pi Hashem is by the word of God. That's the way you would literally understand the pasuk. They understand by the mouth of God, meaning that God kissed them, and that was how they died. Well, da'atya sham mi Moshe, because it says that Miriam that she died there. It said in the pasuk about her death, and by Moshe it says he died there. So it must be she died in the same manner. Well, the obvious question, so why didn't it say al pi Hashem? Well, it's not respectful to talk about God kissing a woman to kill as her death. Not because it's her death, just the idea of God kissing a woman didn't sound appropriate, so they didn't want to say al pi Hashem about a woman, so they did it in a different kind of way, which is make a reference to Moshe and say she died in the same way. Tanu Rabbanan. There are 7 people who, okay, we keep getting different numbers here. We started with things that are only Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Then we came up with other things that there's other people, and we have other psukim to prove it, not bakol, mikol, or kol, but some other word. So here also we have 7 now, that their bodies didn't get full of worms and rot, basically, the body after death. Who are these people? Elohen, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aharon, Miriam, Binyamin ben Yaakov. Okay, Binyamin. So, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, detibu bakol mikol kol. Moshe, Aharon, Miriam, detibu al pi Hashem. Or if you're going to die al pi Hashem, then you're going to die a different kind of death. Your body's not going to end up full of worms and decompose that way. Binyamin ben Yaakov, detibu leBinyamin amar yidid Hashem yishkon lebetach halav. Now, the real meaning of this pasuk, the way it's usually understood, is that God is going to dwell in the nachalav Binyamin. Right, which means the Beit HaMikdash is in this section where the Kodesh Kodashim particularly is in Binyamin's their territory. But the way they understand it is Yedid Hashem Yishkon Lebetach, God is always going to dwell with him, and therefore the Riman Tole'ah won't get to him. Yesh omrim af David. Some people say David because in Tehillim, which we already know was connected with David, whether he wrote it, af bisari yishkon leveta. He also says, my flesh will always forever be in a good place, meaning, right, Rimav Tolea won't get to them. Well, Idach, the one who doesn't explain this pasuk in this way and doesn't add David to the list, what does he say? Ahu rachamehu dekabai. That was just a prayer that he didn't want his body to decompose and get full of worms. But it didn't mean that it happened. It was just his wishful thinking or asking God. Tanu Rabbanit. Last one. Arba'an metu be'etyo shel nachash. Okay, 4 people died because of the nachash, which really means because of the sin of Adam HaRishon. Now, the sin of Adam HaRishon caused the fact that man will not be mortal, or humans won't be mortal, and basically what they're saying is, were it not for that, these people never would have died. Because if you assume you died because you sinned, so most people died because they sinned. These people never sinned. You can imagine such a thing, and therefore they didn't deserve to die a regular death, but because of the sin of Adam HaRishon, they died. Who are these people? This is going to be a bit of a more surprising kind of list. Elohim Binyamin ben Yaakov. Okay, we already had him on the list. That's not so surprising. Amram Avi Moshe. Amram, the father of Moshe. Yishai Avi David. Yishai, the father of David. It's interesting. We always connect people with their fathers. Here we say, this was the father of. We connect them with their sons, and the reason is obvious because or at least partially obvious, right? Their sons were much more famous than they were. So Moshe, right, was obviously much more famous than his father Amram, and David was much more famous than his father Yishai. Now, it could be that it's trying to tell you that what was so amazing about them, right? They were so amazing because, look, they gave birth and kind of brought up, giving credit to the fathers of the great leaders of our history. And Kil'av ben David. And kind of random, one of the sons of David, whose name was Kil'av, he ended up on this list. Okay, how do we know about these 4 people, that they were such amazing people? We don't really. Kulu Gemara, it's all a tradition. We don't really have any reference in the verses to this drasha that we're saying, that they died, without any sin, and they really shouldn't have died otherwise, were it not for Adam HaRishon. Levan Yishai Avi David. Okay, except for Yishai, where we're going to find an interesting way they're going to learn this. The Mefarish Beikra, because the pasuk had a reference to this. Dichtiv ve'et Amasa sam Avshalom tachat Yoav al hatzava. We're having a changing. Avshalom is making Amasa his new head of army, right? When Avshalom rebels against David, ve'Amasa. Now, who does he put? Right, instead of Yoav, he puts Amasa. Who is Amasa? We're going to learn this. Could be a little bit complicated, but I'm going to say it very simply. Amasa was first cousins with Yoav, actually, so he's replacing his cousin. Amasa ben Ish, he was the son of a person. Okay, it's a little weird they say that. You could have said ben Yitra. Okay, but instead of saying that, they say he's the son of a man. Ushmo, and his name is Yitra HaYisraeli. Asher Baal Avigail, and his mother was Avigail. Okay, this man had relations with Avigail Bat Nachash. She was the daughter of Nachash, and she was also Achot Tzruya en Yoav. What does this say? The mothers were sisters. Right? The mother of Yoav was the sister of the mother of Amasa. Okay, that's what they're telling you. Now, notice Abigail is called the daughter of Nachash. Now, Vachibat Nachashi, she wasn't the daughter of Nachash. There was no guy named Nachash. She was the daughter of Elabaki Shaihi. She was the daughter of Yishmael. Okay, this is interesting. I don't know if you realize this, but Dichtiv Achiotehem Tzruya Abigail. Yoav ben Tzruya, right, who we hear about a lot, and this Amasa, who's his cousin, both of their mothers, right, they were both cousins of David, okay? Their mothers were sisters of David. So now what do you see here, right? How do we know this? Because it says, Achiotehem, when he was talking about David and his brothers, it said their sisters were Tzruya and Abigail. So why was she called Bat Nachash if she's really the daughter of Yishai? Bat Mishemek Be'el Tioshel Nachash. She was the daughter of the one who died on account of the Nachash, because of the snake. That's why he died. And with that, Hadran al Chashutafim, we finish the first chapter of Bava Batra, which, as I said before, right, similar to Megillah, where we have all these drashot on Esther. Here we end up with all this drashot on Eov. From there, we also get to Avraham, who's really his counterpart, as we talked about, right? There's a lot of comparisons between them. And we ended up with all these drashot about all these people that kind of shone above other people in all sorts of ways. Okay, again, as we say, food for thought for Shabbat, to try to think about why the first chapter of Batra, which again is all about, and we'll start with now what the first chapter was about. We're going to compare it to what the second chapter is about. First chapter is if we're living together, right? Upon what basis, or we share items, can one demand from the other, right? That we divide it. Okay, what size? How do we divide it? We talked about all that. Now we're going to talk about not living in shared property, but neighbors living next door to each other. And this is really the bulk of the chapter, if not the whole thing, I don't remember. But it's going to be about what am I allowed to do in my, or what am I not allowed to do in my area, whether it's my house or my land, if I have fields, how do I have to be preventative to not cause damage in the next door field? To what extent? Okay, like nowadays, there's all sorts of rules of things you can't do close to the border of your neighbor's property. I know in Israel, right? And I'm sure it's the same in other places. You want to build a pool, for example. You can't build a pool within a certain measurement from your neighbor's property. You can't build a pergola without you. There's all sorts of things that you can't do when you get closer to your neighbor's property. You have to be worried about potential damage, noise, right? It's unclear what all these things are, what the reasons are. And that's what we're going to discuss now. Now, on the one hand, it's my property. I should be able to do whatever I want. And in fact, we're going to see today a reference to a machloket we're going to come across later in the chapter about the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi. They both have a different approach to this whole thing. Rabbi Yossi has an approach, I can do whatever I want in my field. I really don't have to be worried about you. It's my property. I could do what I want. Okay, that's his approach to a certain extent, though. Even Rabbi Yossi is limited. If it's going to directly cause you damage, it's a different story. But if it's indirect, I don't have to worry about it. The rabbis say, no, you really have to worry. Okay, we're going to see today a case that they're going to quote in the name of the rabbis that we'll see later in the chapter, that if I plant a tree, if you have a pit in your territory, I have to distance my tree 25 cubits. That's a lot of space from your bore, so that my roots don't eventually get to your property and destroy them. Okay, that's where obviously Rabbi Yossi says, what do you mean? Like, that is so indirect, I don't have to worry about that. Okay, but the rabbis think that I have to do that. I have to think about what are the ramifications, the long-term ramifications of what I'm doing on my property and how it might affect you. So in this Mishnah, we're not going to have a machloket. Okay, we're going to just start with our Mishnah. Lo yachfor adam bor. Oh, and I just want to say one other thing, because just want to say before we start, which is the Mishnah doesn't deal with what if I did it anyway and it caused damage. Like, what, in other words, if I did something that causes damage to my neighbor's property, then how do we assess the damage? If you have neighbors, you probably know that sometimes it's very complicated. Okay, I have a thing with one of my neighbors now that I have water in a wall that is a shared wall. On my side, there's water damage. And on the other side, my neighbor has a pool, a fish pond. And basically the water sits there, and there's obviously, or at least again, obvious to us that it's not, what do you say, atum, it's not sealed properly. And the water is leaking in, and it's getting to our wall. Now, go prove it, right? It's very hard to prove. I brought experts, he's brought experts, and we're in an argument about what exactly is the source of the water damage. Is coming from him, is it coming from, obviously anyone I bring says, of course it's coming from there, and anyone he brings says, of course it's not. So it becomes very complicated, and perhaps that's why the Mishna is saying, let's try to prevent any of this from happening so that you don't end up in an argument which could affect relationships. Thank God they're very nice people, and it hasn't affected our relationship, but it's complicated, obviously. And trying to figure out who the damage is from, and this isn't the first time we've had these kind of issues, because it's not so clear cut. And then, so better off it's possible that we're not even attacking it from the damages perspective. What we're saying is, let's try to avoid it. Let's try to keep your distance so that you don't do something that might eventually cause problems. So let's start with the Mishnah. Lo yachfor adam bor samuch leboro shel chavero. Don't dig a bore, a pit for water next to a bore of your neighbors. These are all things that have water. Because again, as I said, with the pool, right, the water gets through cracks and other things and could cause the wall of their bore to fall apart, and then their bore will be ruined. So you can't put not a shiach, which is another, shiach and ma'ala are different kinds of water ditches, and an amat mayim, which is a water channel, or an ivrechet kovsim is a pool that they would use to soak the laundry. What you need to do is you need to distance yourself from the wall of your friend. Okay, already ding, 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 there's some sort of problem here. We started with don't dig a bore next to your neighbor's bore, but distance it, you would have expected the Mishna to say, distance it from the bore of your neighbor, distance it from your neighbor's pit, 3 tvachim, or sabasi, which we'll talk about in a minute. But instead of saying distance it from your friend's bore, it says distance it from your friend's wall. That's weird. We weren't talking about a wall. We didn't say don't do it from the boundary of your friend. We said don't do it from the bore of your friend. So we're going to have to deal with this. The biggest question the Gemara has on the Mishnah. And then it says visa besid. And you have to put, like I said, sealing, right? You have to seal it with limestone so that it doesn't, right? The water damage doesn't get there. Now, there's a debate about whether this is either distance it or do sab besid, or maybe it means both. Okay, we're going to see that later. Other things that you have to distance from your friend's bore or from their wall. Okay, it actually says mikotlo. Okay, here you have to do it from their wall, not from their bore. You have to distance the gefet, the zevel, et hamelach, et hasid, et haslaim, mikotlo shel chavero shlosha tvachim. So the gefet is the dregs, what's left in after you make olive oil from the olives. If you might remember, we had it in Masechet Shabbat when we were talking about cooking. It creates heat. Okay, it's a source of heat, and zevel, the fertilizer, also perhaps the issue is it creates heat, and the heat can also ruin the wall of your neighbor, can wear away at it. Melach, the salt, that's more of a chemical reaction, or the seed, the limestone, or the slaim, or stones. Unclear exactly what we mean. It could be flint. It could be, we're not sure. Okay, there's different opinions. It could be just having rocks there. People will kick the rocks and it'll ruin the wall. It'll get in the way. It's unclear exactly what the issue of the stones are. So again, you have to distance it from your neighbor's wall, either, right, 3 tvachim, or make sure to do sabisid. Here it says, although some versions have ve, okay, just like the first part. You have to, seeds have to be distanced. Okay, and the plow, because the plow breaks up the land and then it could kind of loosen up the foundation of the wall. Okay, there's ra'im also. I guess the seeds could also, it weakens when there's seeds there, it weakens takes away from the soil, right? It weakens the ground there, which could ruin their wall. And also the machreshat could also mean if you're getting there, then you're walking right near the wall, you could be damaging somehow. Vet me raglayim, urine, minakotel, you have to distance that either for smell purposes or also maybe chemically it's not good. Shlosha tvachim. Umarchikim et harechaim shlosha min hashechev shehem 4 min harechev ve'et hatenor shlosha min hakilya shehem 4 min hasafa. Okay, here you have to get into the reality of the utensils they use. We're talking about a millstone with a big stone with a small stone on top. So the big stone juts out farther. So it's going to have to be 3 from the bottom of the big millstone, which is going to be 4 tvachim from the top piece, which is narrower. And the same thing with the oven. It's a bit of a debate about which part is what. There's a rim, which is narrower, obviously. So it's going to be 4 from the rim. And from the wider part of the oven, there's just a debate whether the rim is at the top or the rim is at the bottom on like a stand that the oven is on. Okay, either which way it has to be 3 from the part that's, juts out, and 4 from the part that's, that's more in. Here again, the tanur is the heat. What's the problem with the rechaim? The millstone, well, the vibrations. It cuts all it crushes up the grains, and it works very fast and with loud vibrations, and the vibrations could affect the wall nearby. Okay, so now that's our Mishnah. The Gemara starts off with our big question, which is patach bebor b'siyim bekotel, turning now to amabet, and there's a study guide for the second part of what we're going to get to after we get through the first part here. There's a study guide with charts that will help you understand the continuation or keep it organized. So it started with bore and then ended with a wall. So now it's a little confusing. It said distance it from your friend's pit, right? Don't dig it near your friend's pit. Distance it from their wall. It's a little bit strange to have said distance it from the pit, right? And that's what's in parentheses, which whether you read or not read, that's what it means. Should have said, unless you distance it from your friend's pit, not from their wall. So Amar Abaye B'Tamar Yehuda Mikotel Boroshanin. We don't mean wall, the boundary. We mean the wall of the person's pit. Okay? We mean if the person has a pit right near the border, make sure to distance it from the wall of their pit 3 tvachim. To which the Gemara says, "V'litni elam ken ruchik miborosh shel chavero." Okay, let's explain already here what they mean. Look in Rashi. Okay, this is very complicated to understand this next section. I'm going to go with Rashi's interpretation. Just know there's other interpretations. Rashi says here, "V'litni miborosh shel chavero." If you just said boro, oh, sorry, I'm already on the question. Sorry, I meant to say the earlier Rashi. Mikota borosh shaninu. Klomar, hi kota de katane, the kota. Okay, this actually Rashi doesn't add much yet. What we mean is distance it, if there's a bore right near the border, don't distance it from the bore 3 tvachim, distance it from the wall of the bore. By the way, what is a wall of a bore? So wall of a bore could be 2 things. A bore, basically you just dig. What's the wall? So the wall could be, well, depending on what kind of ground you have and how you can do this, you might have to put stones in and build a wall to then kind of have a pit there so all the dirt doesn't fall into your pit. That's one option. It's an actual physical wall of your bore. But another option, and more likely, or at least there are cases of this, it's just the ground around. And what we're saying is the ground that's around your bore basically functions as a wall to your bore to prevent, right? Okay, that basically supports your bore, right? A bore is just a hole, but it's not just a hole, it's the fact that you have soil around it, and that all the soil in the area around, and this is what we're going to learn soon, how thick, but the soil that actually functions as your wall. So now the Gemara says, before we understand this a little better, let's just see the Gemara's question, although it's hard to understand the question a little bit. So why don't they just say, distance it from the bore of your friend 3 tvachim? Okay, now Rashi says, "Va'ana yadana de mikotel kamer." I would obviously know it means from the wall of your bore. Why is that? De'im mechalal boro kamal, ein ze kones letoch shelo klum. Pamim shu soter av kotel chavero murachav mishlosha. What we're basically going to say, what there's an assumption here is that when the friend built the bore, okay, what happened here is I wanted to dig a pit. My neighbor already has one right near the border. But the assumption here, when we say mikota below, we're talking about the kotel of the bore. The assumption is that the neighbor, again, this is Rashi's explanation, the neighbor already had to have distanced his bore from the wall, 3 tvachim. Why? Because the bore includes the wall, right? And that all has to be in his domain and can't be going into my domain. So basically, they already distanced it 3 tvachim. And therefore, it's saying, like the Gemara then questions, well, if that's all considered part of the bore, then it still could have said below, to which, right? In other words, if the bore kind of includes the wall, then obviously we're saying, right, the bore, the wall, it's all one and the same. So why did the Gemara have to use the word kotel? Well, hakam mashmalan, it must be coming to teach you a different halacha. Okay, de kotel bor shloshat tvachim. Okay, it wants you to know that what's the size of the wall of a bore? 3 tvachim. How do we know this from our Mishna? Okay, this is what's a little complicated, but the way they're understanding it is like this. The first person to dig a bore had to leave a wall of 3 tvachim. Okay, because that's okay. They need to that their bore includes the wall, and they have to distance it 3 tvachim. And what our Mishna is telling us is, when I go to dig my bore, I can't put it right next to the wall. I also have to distance it 3 tvachim from their wall, from the end of their bore, basically, which includes their wall, which ends up, again, this is Rashi's interpretation, you have 6 tvachim, okay? So what they want you to know is, okay, and I'm going to read how I know that Rashi says this, because in the HaKamashma, what's really coming to teach you is some other halacha, which is a bore's wall is 3 tvachim, which is needed for what? The Gemara says, nafkamina lemetachumem. Let me just read that until the end, and then I'll read Rashi. What you need to know this for is for selling and buying, okay? In what way? This is just like the kad and chavid and aminechet kad, where there you put down a kad, and then all of a sudden the Mishnah starts talking about the owner of the chavit. Weren't we just talking about a cod, a jug, not a barrel? Why do we interchange them? And we learn to say, well, some places interchange those. If you sell a chavit, you can actually give the guy a boar, a cod, because you could say, oh, well, I thought when I said chavit, I was selling you a chavit. I thought I meant I was intending cod. So here they want to teach you some other thing from Ekach Memkar, which is Kedetanya. Haomer lechabero bor uketaleha ani mocher lecha. I'm selling you a boar and its walls. If I promise you I was selling you a boar and the walls around it, how much is considered the walls around it? And this, by the way, makes a lot of sense. If we say it wasn't a physical wall, it's just the surrounding area that functions as a wall. Our Mishnah teaches us it's 3 tvachim. Now, how does the Mishnah teach us this? And again, Rashi is going to now really explain better what this whole section really came to say, which is ha-kamash malan. I mean Rashi on the words that start ha-kamash malan. B'may ditnan mikotel boro lamadnu ba. The fact that they use the word kotel boro, this is all to teach us שהכותל בורו של ראשון מילא כל 3 טווחים שהוזקק גם הוא להרחיק מן המצה. The key thing it's really teaching you again is that the person who built the first bore, which is not the one we're discussing in the Mishnah, we're talking about neighbor comes along and says, oh, I want to dig a bore, but my neighbor already has one. Well, it's teaching you already that you have to distance the 3 tvachim from the wall of your neighbor's bore, which means that the wall of your neighbor's bore, we're assuming, already was distanced 3 tvachim from the border. In other words, your neighbor already distanced his 3 tvachim from the border, and you have to distance yours 3 tvachim on the other direction. Okay? And from that, we're going to learn this extra thing, which is the wall of a bore, if you're doing business dealings, is 3 tvachim wide. Now, this is going to assume one thing, which is going to create problems for us going forward, which is that even though our Mishnah said, don't dig a bore in the proximity, a certain proximity to your neighbor's bore, it sounds like what? If there wasn't a bore there, I could put it right up against the border. Now, the way we just explained the Mishnah sounds like, well, the first guy also needed to distance it from the border, even though the neighbor didn't have a bore at all. So keep this in mind as we go forward, because that's going to be a big question to some of these interpretations we're going to see. So now we get to this big machloket, and for that, there's a chart on the page. Itmar. If I want to put a bore right next to the border, am I allowed to? So, and this is why you're going to see that this is going to come in conflict with our Mishnah and the way we understood the Mishnah. Abaye Amar Somech, Rav Amar Eno Somech. So we have a machloket Abaye and Rava, whether I can put it right up against the border or I can't. So now, the assumption here is you don't have anything on your side. And I want to put my bore. Again, the Mishnah seems to imply only if there was already a bore on the other side. However, once we explain the Mishnah, it seems to imply even the first person, before there was another bore, has to distance it 3 tvachim. So it's confusing. So Abaye says, no problem. You can put it right up against the border. Rava says, no, you can't. So now the question is, in what kind of field are we discussing? Now, there's 2 kinds of fields. There's fields that can kind of function with rainwater or have, let's say, a channel of water running through or a river or something like that. There's other fields that you need to dig borot, ditches, because you need to have water there to be able to water your fields. So there's sadeh ha'asuya leborot, which is kind of, you're going to need to, at some point, you're going to dig a bore. And then we have ones that are not, because you don't really need it. So, bisadeh asuya leborot, divrei hakol eno somech. Now, this machloket is obviously not, now this is the first version. Okay, we'll say obviously not, but according to this reading. If you have a sadeh, which, if I want to dig a bore next to a field where there's no borot, but it's a field that is going to need borot dug there, well, then everyone agrees I can't put it right up against the wall because I'm preventing you from digging in your area. Ki pligi b'sadeh she'ena asuya leborot, their machloket must be in a field that isn't necessarily going to need borot, or isn't likely going to need borot. And therefore, Abaye says, Somech, you can put it right up against, because ha'ena asuya leborot. The assumption is your bore is damaging their bore, not anything else. So if they're not going to anyway dig a bore, of course you can put it right up against the wall. Rava Amari no somech. Rava says no way. Da Amarle kiechi da'at imlacht v'chapart ananami mimlacha v'chaparna. They could say, listen, you decided to dig a bore here. The second guy could say, hey, don't dig a bore right next to my wall because you just decided to dig a bore. Maybe later I'll decide I want a bore for some other reason. So that's the debate between Abaye and Rava, according to the first version. Ikeda Amrit, but some people say, and now we're going to just shift everything. Everyone's going to agree that if the field is not meant for borot, of course you could put your bore right next to the wall because the person's not going to dig a well. We don't have to worry about the off chance that maybe they'll decide to change their mind and do that. Ki pligi, the machloket is in the other case. Abaye amar somech. Now, this goes back to how much do I have to be concerned about what I'm doing and how it's going to affect you down the road. So even if you have a field that's meant for borot, you don't have a bore there right now, Abaye says somech. I can put it there. And even, now remember I told you about machloket Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi. Even afilu l'Rabbanan da'amrei marchikim et ha'ilam in a bor 25 ama. Even according to the rabbis who hold that if you have a bore, I can't put my tree 25 cubits away because eventually the roots will get there and ruin your bore. That's not the same as here because hatamhu de bi'idana de kanata ita labor. I have to worry about future potential damage that I'm going to cause you because right now when I want to plant my tree, your bore is in existence. Aval hacha, but here bi'idana de kachafa leita labor. But right now you don't have anything there. Why do I have to worry about maybe you'll want to dig a bore there? It's not my problem. Even the rabbis who think in general I have to be concerned. It's only if you actually have a bore there now. If your bore is in existence, I don't have to worry about the future possibility. Maybe you'll want to dig a bore there. Okay, even in a place that's asuyala borot, but you have other places in your field you could put the bore. It's not my problem. The Rava, he's going to say the opposite. Eino samech. You can't put it near because it's nesadeh asuyala borot. And afilu Rabbi Yossi, and even Rabbi Yossi, who has this attitude of do whatever you want, da'amar zechofer b'toch shelo v'zenotea b'toch shelo. In the tree case, he says you can dig your bore, and the other one can plant their tree, and don't. Each one doesn't have to worry. Well, that's hanimile hatan to be done at the kanata late nihul sharashim demaz kelalabor. But that's because when I plant my tree, if your bore is in existence, I don't have to worry about it, according to Rabbi Yossi, because it's going to take a long time for my roots to get to you. That's what we call indirect damages. Eventually, it'll get the 25 cubits to your space, or 24, let's say, it's less than 25. But I don't have to worry about that. But when I dig my bore right next to your potential space to dig a bore, I'm ruining your land right now. Because every blow I do into the ground when I'm digging is going to damage your land nearby. And that land will no longer be land that will be strong enough to hold a bore in it. And that's why even Rabbi Yossi will agree, because that's called direct damages. So we now had all these different approaches to which case do they have a machloket and what's their opinion. Now we're going to bring three difficulties. Okay, we're going to have a difficulty on Rava according to the first reading. We're going to have two difficulties on Abaye according to the second reading. And with that, we'll finish today's daf. So Tana. The first two are going to be from our Mishna. So our Mishna says, Lo yachfor adam bor samuch leboro shel chavero. Tama di ikabor, hale kabor samech. Again, the whole Mishnah implies that I can't dig a bore if your bore is there. But if you don't have a bore there, it sounds like I could put it right up against the wall. So now the question is, which case is it? Now, the easy way to understand this in the most simplest way is that if we say if we go by the second language, now in the second part, okay, and if you look at this chart, you'll see it bolded. Rava holds there's a case where eno someh, right? And Abaye holds in both cases you can be someh, whether it's asuyala borot and not asuyala borot, you can put it nearby, right? And Rava holds there's one case where you can't be someh. Now, if you say, now this Mishnah implied you can be someh. Now, everybody in this lashon, this reading, has a case where you can be someh because everyone agrees that if the sadeh is not meant for borot, of course you could put it right next to the border. Even Rava agrees with that. So when our Mishnah implies that you could put it right next to the border if there's nothing there, we could just say very simply, matnitim b'sadeh she'ena asuyah leborot. The Mishnah is talking about a case where it's not meant for borot, and therefore, yes, you can put it right up against, as long, right, if there's nothing there, of course you can put it right up against. You don't have to worry on the off chance maybe they'll dig a bore. And the only problem is when there's a bore in existence. But For the first lashon, we're going to have a problem according to Rava, because according to Rava, let's just look at the first lashon. Everyone agrees in a case if it's atsuya leborot, you can't put a bor right next to there. And Rava says even if it's not atsuya leborot, you can't put a bor. So according to Rava, you can never put a bor next to your neighbor's property, even if they don't have a bor there. And the Mishna seemed to imply you could. So that's going to be the contradiction. Abaye, of course, says in any case you could put it nearby as long as the sadeh is not meant for borot. So according to Abaye, you would just say the Mishnah is talking about a case that say natsuya leborot, and therefore if the bor is there, you can't do it. If it's not there, you can, and that's Abaye, that's perfect. But Rava, who says no way, no how, you can't ever, kasha, the Mishnah makes no sense. But remember how he explained the Mishnah. Even though the simple reading of the Mishnah seems to imply only if the other one has a bor, but if there's no bor, you don't have to distance it at all. But wait, didn't we explain the Mishnah? What do you mean? We explained the Mishnah saying, Amar Abaye b'temer Rav Yehuda mikotel b'lo shaninu. The whole thing is from the wall of the bor, and that's why I use that language, meaning even the first person, what did we say? The first person who builds, when there's nothing on the other side, already from the beginning needs to distance their bor 3 tefachim. So therefore, of course, the Mishnah means that. And of course, Rava fits perfectly with the Mishnah, because the Mishnah implies you do have to distance yourself, at least the 3 tefachim, from the wall of your neighbor. You can't dig, even if there's nothing on the other side. And then that fits perfectly with Rava. So now we're going to bring the second version of the same difficulty, which is going to be obviously, well then, this reading, the Mishnah plus the Gemara on it is going to raise a question for Abaye in the second reading, because there he's going to say you can put it next to the wall, and we just learned that you always have to distance it even if nobody else has anything on the other side. So let's read it inside. Some people say that they started with already the Gemara's explanation of the Mishnah, which was which assumed anyone who digs a bor always has to distance it from the neighbor's property 3 tefachim, even if, right, there's nothing on the other side. So again, we'll see the first lashon here works perfectly, because then you would just say if you say everyone agrees, the second version, that if it's meant for borot, then you're allowed to put it there, then we would say, if it's meant for borot, you can't put it. That's the first version. Then the Mishnah is b'sadeh hasuya leborot, and therefore Abaye and Rava both agree in that case you can't put it near, and that is exactly what we learned about our Mishnah. Again, not what the Mishnah says; it's what we explained. The Mishnah is saying that the first person already needs to distance, and that's because we must be talking about a field that's meant for borot, and therefore everyone agrees. But if you say lahach lishana, the second lashon, de'amar b'sadeh hasuya leborot pligi, even if it's meant for borot, Abaye says you can put it next to the wall. Then Abaye thinks in every case you could put it next to the wall, according to that version. And then you're going to have a problem. Because Rava will say, oh, it's just a sadeh hasuya leborot. There you can't put it near. But Abaye has no way to say there's ever a problem to put it near. He thinks in all cases you could put it right up against the wall, as long as there's no bor on the other side. So Amar Lacha Abaye matnitin shabau lachbor b'vat. He would have to explain our Mishnah to resolve this problem, if you go by that language, as a case where both of us started digging at the same time. It's not that you had a bor already, but we were both digging at the same time. Then I have a problem. Okay, if you don't have anything there, then I can put it next to it. But our Mishnah, which says we both have to distance 3 tefachim, it's because, right, but I have to distance 3 tefachim from yours, which is already distanced 3 tefachim. We're actually talking about where we're both digging at the same time. Last question, Tashma. And this is a totally different source. Stella haba biyadayim, and it's going to be the same question as we just had on Abaye on the second language, who thinks that, again, you can always put it next to it, the wall. Stella haba biyadayim, if there's soft soil, okay, the soil is very soft and easily breakable. Zeh chofer boro mikan, v'zeh chofer boro mikan. Zeh merachik 3 tefachim v'sabesi, v'zeh merachik 3 tefachim v'sabesi. You can dig yours, I can dig mine, but we each have to distance at 3 tefachim. Now, what do you see here? According to Abaye, you can put it up against the wall, no matter what. Here it says you can't. You have to distance at 3 tefachim. So the Gemara says, oh, this is a different case. This isn't a difficulty because babi yadayim shani. It's because the ground is so tender and easily ruined, that's why you have to distance yourself. So the Gemara says that's such an obvious answer. How did they even think that this was a question? What were they thinking in the beginning? Well, they thought that this really applies to all bochot, but why did they specifically mention the case of Babi Yadayim? Babi Yadayim itztrichale, they needed to, because Babi Yadayim, you might have thought, regular board, you need to distance 3 tvachim. But maybe Babi Yadayim, libai nami rav chatfei, maybe you need more space to distance. Maybe 3 tvachim isn't enough. Hamash malan that no. Babi Yadayim needs the same as everything else. You need to distance 3 tvachim. But anyway, it's not a problem because it assumes it's like everything else, and in all other cases, you have to distance, which would then, 1 second, right? No, so then that's what we originally thought, and that's why we thought it was a question on Abaye. But in the end, we say, no, it's really just unique to Babi Yadayim, and it's not for any other case. Any other case, Abaye would say you could put it right up against the wall, and that's how Abaye would understand the source. Okay, so what did we do in the second part of today's stop after getting through all the bakol, mikol, kol, and drashot on that? Basically talked about how much one needs to distance a board from the friend's board or other things from the friend's wall that might cause damage, ways you can prevent damages. From there, we got to the language of the Mishna. Something was off because it talked about a board and then all of a sudden a wall. And that taught us basically that even the first person who comes has to already distance their wall, even if there's nothing on the other side for 3 tvachim. And then you also have to distance yours 3 tvachim. You can't say, oh, well, his is already 3 tvachim. I could just put mine up against the wall. No. Both sides have to distance 3 tvachim. Then we brought this big machloka between Abaye and Rava, 2 different versions of exactly what case, and then we had to try to raise questions from our Mishnah or from our Mishnah with the Gemara's explanation, and then we had to figure out how can we resolve those difficulties, and the last one as well. So 3 difficulties against different opinions and different, depending on the first language or the second language of understanding the machloka, but we resolved all our issues. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shema B'Sorah Tova.